starting recording. And then it does that thing where it takes the pictures out. And there we go. I think we're good to go. So hello, everybody. I'm your host, Eric Smith. And we're going to jump right into my favorite horror with the author of Everything That's Underneath, Beneath, and such a pretty smile.
All right.
Kristi
You got them all.
Well, hello.
You.
How are you doing today?
Excellent, excellent. Could not ask for a nicer Sunday. So super excited to be here and talk about probably one of my favorite spooky movies ever. Love it so much.
I was very excited for your pick. We'll get to that a little later.
Yeah.
I would say we're going to keep people in suspense, but it's going to be in the title of this video, so people are going to know what they're in for.
Yeah, you know.
But right off the bat here, we've got a couple of novels right here, and then your short story collection.
That's right.
Do you have a preferred story length that you like to write?
Story length, I feel like a sweet spot for me, and this isn't necessarily in my reading, but in my own writing, I love that 3,500 to 4,000 word range. And I feel like that is just the right amount of time to get in and get out without too much over explaining. And that's why I've really struggled, I feel like, with making the jump to the novel, because in the novel, I feel the reader expects a little bit more of an explanation, expects a little bit more of things to not be quite so open-ended. Where I feel like you can get away with a lot more in a short story, where the reader will come along with you and suspend their disbelief and not need really as much to accept the world that you're creating in this very finite space. And so 3,500 to 4,000 is this really beautiful spot for me. But when I'm reading, I usually, I think, tend to want to go a little longer into that 5,000 to 6,000 range, but I don't know, that 3 to 4 is such it's so good. It's like that perfect.
Well, do you ever find that the story dictates a certain length? You sit down, I'm going to write this short story or this novelette, but the story just insists that it's longer or shorter?
All the time. And I honestly, I think that sometimes stories in my head, when I think that they're going to be longer, they always end up shorter. And I don't know why that is. I feel I'll have this idea and think, oh, this is meaty. This is going to require a little bit more. And then as I get going, I go, I really don't think that I need that. I don't think that's going to add anything to the character, to the story itself. And so I start to pace back. But yeah, every time I've ever set out with a word count or an end page goal in mind, I never do it. It's either longer or it's shorter. And even with novel writing, you have in your head, 80 to 90,000 words. And I'm realizing I'm writing one right now. It's going to probably be a lot longer, but then I'll probably surprise myself at some point within the writing and end up, it's like 70,000. So I always have good intentions going in, but I never feel like I am able to execute correctly.
Now, when you're submitting to a particular market and they give you the word count, do you find yourself having trouble meeting that word count? Or are you able to rein it in a little bit when you know specifically what it has to be?
If it is for an anthology call, I try to be very cognizant as I'm writing of where I am in terms of their requirement. Now, I try not to do too much limitation on myself, because I know that in the editing phase, I can always go back in and, take scalpel and come through and cut what needs to be cut. And that in itself is difficult, but I think the only time I have ever really been super hyper aware of word count is when I'm chasing a white whale, like Nightmare Magazine. I love them so much. It is the one that I haven't gotten it yet. And so I always have those parameters in the back of my mind as I'm writing, especially for short fiction now. But I try not to put too much pressure on myself in terms of word count until after I've written that first draft, and then I'll go back in, especially if it's for someone who has specifically reached out to me, because I don't want to disappoint and say, hey, I wrote a story for you, but it's accidentally 10,000 words. And I know you don't have the space for it, so sorry. Or, expect them to try to move things around. So I try to worry about it afterward rather than before. But unless it's Nightmare, then I'm always worried. It just doesn't go.
I don't know if it's just my perception or if there actually has been this sort of resurgence in anthologies. It seems like every time I order books online, there's at least one anthology that I've thrown in there. So are there any recent anthologies that have come out, or any that are coming out soon that you have anything in?
Recently, I have a story coming out in the new Ellen Datlow anthology, the new Her Monsters anthology that is coming out. And of course, now I'm blanking on the actual name of said anthology. And if you give me a moment, I can actually tell you exactly what it is. Screams from the Dark, 29 Tales of Monsters and the Monstrous.
Nice.
And so that is the anthology that I am in most recently. And unfortunately, I've taken a break from short fiction just because I've been in novel writing mode. And so I do have some anthology calls that I have on my calendar marked as I definitely want to write a story to try to get into that one, that are forthcoming. And so other than the Datlow, I haven't had one in quite some time. I'm trying to think of when the last one would have been. It probably would have been last year, honestly. But yeah, because I've just been I've been so enmeshed in just novel world. Let me go back here. I'm trying to check and see because my memory is awful here lately. Actually no, that this would have been this year. Liminal Spaces would have been my one before that, which was Kevin Lucia. And so an anthology of dark speculative fiction. I did have a story included in there, and it's titled The Animal of Our Bodies. And then almost right before that, in the Bad Book from John F.D. Taft, who was wonderful, which is a collection of stories that are all, what's the best word? Like inversions of Bible stories or Bible verses. So
cool.
Rather than the good book, it's the bad book, which was a really fascinating concept. And so I have a story in there as well titled To Dash Their Heads Against the Stones, which was a take on a Bible verse that says that as well. And so those have probably been the most recent. And unfortunately, it's just been those. Normally I have a lot more, but been a little busy.
Well, I would think that getting into an Ellen Datlow anthology is a dream for writers.
Absolutely. I had that is definitely one of those key moments, I feel, especially if you're a horror writer. If you can get into Datlow anything, if you can get into the year's best, and then to receive an anthology invite is really the kind of the cherry on top of the whipped cream. And so when that came through, and then she said yes, I think I had an entire day of dancing. I think I danced the entire 24 hours.
Nice.
So that was a wonderful, wonderful thing. And especially when you look at those table of contents of to be with those people who I read and I'm in awe of, and to be among them is just, it's humbling.
Great. Yeah, I can just lean over a little bit. I have stacks. My shelves are full, so I have stacks of books on the floor. And I can immediately see I just got Attack from the 80s. I can't read that one title. I have a book I just got of carnival horror.
Oh.
Yeah, just anthologies like crazy.
Oh yeah.
Which is a great way to find new authors. I know there's people that just don't get into short stories, which is crazy to me.
I don't understand that.
But I'll be reading and immediately make notes of an author if I'm just, wow, this story was fantastic. Who wrote this? Where's their bio in the back? What else have they done?
Absolutely. That's probably one of my favorite things, is to be able to go through just a vast array of different sorts of stories. And when you find a style particularly that you like, and to be able to go and, like you said, find an author and look at all of their back material. And that's the coolest.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's always the thrill of, it's got 10 of my favorite authors in here.
And that too. Or it's a really cool theme. I think that that's what's really great about where anthologies have been going lately, is that for almost any niche idea that you have, you can almost guarantee there's an anthology about it. And so if you're really into a particular kind of fiction, you can find, a book that has 30 stories in it that all have to do with variations on that theme. And I think we're living in a very rich time when it comes to the anthology.
I just got an email today. There's a book that, actually, I'm not sure if it's out for the general public yet. It's called Monsters Unleashed. That is new stories about classic Universal monsters.
Oh, that's great.
It's got a great table of contents, and I backed it on Kickstarter, which is why I have it already. And it's signed by everybody that's in it.
Oh, wow.
And it's I got a t-shirt with it, and a print, and a poster, and stickers, all sorts of cool stuff. But I just got an email that they're going to have a new Kickstarter for a book titled, I believe it's Shakespeare Unleashed, and it's horror stories based on or inspired by Shakespeare.
Oh, that is fun.
And they've
What a
already
great
announced
playground.
like Joe Lansdale, a bunch of other people.
Mhm.
So I'll be backing that one as well once the Kickstarter goes up.
That's amazing. Yeah. And that's the thing, is that and then you see, that's what's so cool about an anthology too, is like you said, you'll see a Joe Lansdale, or you'll see these kind of like heavy hitter names. But then you'll see, again, people, like you said, people you've never heard of before. And to be able to, as a newer writer, say, I'm going to be in an anthology, with Stephen Graham Jones, or someone who's been doing this for a really long time, is a huge thing. And so I think anthologies give you that opportunity that a lot of other things don't.
Yeah.
So it's cool to see.
Yeah. And I think what they did, I don't know if they're going to do it with the Shakespeare Unleashed, but I think with Monsters Unleashed, they had all of the invited authors. So when it went live on Kickstarter, I think they already had authors and titles of stories, but then they had an open call. They're like, we have 5 more slots, whatever it was, and had an open call for it. I don't know if they'll do that for the next one, but, which is really great, because then you get those seasoned authors, those fan favorite authors, and then they might sneak in some new to you.
Yeah,
people.
absolutely. Yeah. And that's how horror grows and thrives, because there's so many people out there who are doing really cool stuff, really great stuff that you may or may not notice. And it just takes that one little thing. And yeah, I'm glad to see it.
Yeah. I've talked about this to other people, but way back in the day, I had a subscription to Twilight Zone magazine, which I really wish that was around again.
Yeah.
But, it's full of short stories, wonderful fiction. And then I got my first Joe Lansdale short story collection and realized that I'd read some of those stories in Twilight Zone magazine. Right. Same thing with John Skipp and Craig Spector. And I always get a kick out of that personally. Oh, I remember reading this 10 years ago.
Right.
And it never registered who that was. Now I realize, I was reading Lansdale before I knew who he was.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on from short stories to longer works. In particular, this lovely little book. Now, I had seen this on a list of, must reads or something. I always like to look at those. Book Riot will have lists and things, and I try to remember or make note of the interesting books that I see. And so I'd seen it on a list, and then very shortly after that was at Barnes and Noble. There it was on the shelf. It's all right. I definitely have to pick that up. I hear it's really, really good. Um, so this is your first hardback?
That is my first hardback.
And it's from St. Martin's Press. So
that's right.
What is the process of, I guess, essentially having something published by St. Martin's Press? Take us through step by step. No,
step by step. You know, and it's funny because I actually just put something onto my Twitter that walked through the concept to final publication and the amount of time that it took to go from there to there on my Twitter. And I will say, I think that the biggest difference is the amount of time that it's going to take to go from, okay, it's officially sold, it's going to come. And then also the amount of input that you're going to get in the process of going from, hey, here's this draft that I've spent, 2 years of my life on. And hey, do you want to buy it? And I was not prepared for just the sheer amount of editing that was going to go into refining a book that was going to go out through a larger publisher. And so when I say the amount of editing, I am talking 7, 8, 9 drafts, almost a year and a half to 2 years of editing with my agent first to get it ready to go out on submission, and then editing with my actual editor at St. Martin's, who is a wonderful, wonderful genius woman who I am so jealous of how intelligent she is. And then going through copy edits, and then going through, your first pass, your second pass, going through sensitivity readings. And you really have to learn how to take your ego and shove it into a locked box and leave it there, because you're going to be hearing input, and it's never unkind input. And, once it goes out into the world, it's unkind input, which is fine, but you get used to that. But the amount of feedback that you're going to receive can be a little overwhelming, and learning how to accept that and then integrate it into whatever it is you're working on, and then do it, is an experience that I had not been familiar with.
Excuse me. Well, were there any I hate to use the word arguments, anything that you sort of had to fight for?
Oh yeah. The scene in the book. Okay. And if you've read it, you probably know what I'm talking about. The scene where Caroline has just had her big showdown with Daniel when she finds out about her sculpture. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And she's driving away, and she gets a phone call about her father. And then she has that scene with the dog.
Right.
Stands up and laughs at her. I love that scene. I had to fight for that scene because it's a little too drawn out. We worry that it's a little too gruesome. We worry that it's not, that's what I feel too. We worry that it's not necessarily serving Caroline in any way and her forward momentum and the development of this grief or what she's going through. And to me, it's just too unsettling to take out. And so I kind of that was the one thing I really drew. I was like, no, I personally need this scene to stay in. Maybe people will like it, maybe they won't. But that was the one that I was fighting for because I just loved it so much.
Do you feel that every scene needs to be pushing the story forward, or can you have obviously you fought for this one. Mm-hmm. Can you have those character moments, those things that are just good storytelling that aren't necessarily propelling the plot?
Right. I love those scenes. I love those scenes that are strictly there for atmospheric purposes and that create that sense of unease. And I also recognize where not everyone would necessarily like to live in that space. I want to live in that space, But I think that was probably the biggest differentiation between going into a big publishing house, is that they really are about that tightening of everything's got to be that propulsive, moving everything forward, whereas I like to stew in that weirdness. And so I feel, or I hope anyway, that as I continue to write, I'll be able to find a balance where I can kind of sneak in those weird moments where I'm just sitting in that nastiness. And I do feel, though, that with commercial novels, they really push for that. Just keep it moving, just keep it going. You want them to be turning the pages, where I want people to slow down. So it's a fine line, and I don't know if I've perfected it, and I probably will continue to not know if I perfected it, but it's definitely a struggle for me because I like the weird.
Yeah. Are you a planner or a pantser?
Oh God, I'm a pantser now.
Okay.
I hate this so much, but with novel writing, I have had to become a planner. I hate outlining. I hate it so much. But in order to save myself the heartache of the editing on the back end, I'm having to plan now. And I've gone through, I cannot tell you how many versions of an outline on this next book. I'm probably on number 7 or number 8. But when I have that many working pieces, my brain just does not work that way to be able to keep track of everything as I'm just writing. And so I have had to outline. I do not do that for short stories. I could not ever. I would rather not write ever again than have to plan out a short story. And so my preference is definitely to pants, but I understand why.
Well, it would seem to me, especially with something like this, and I love holding this up. I love that cover.
Thank you.
With the 2 timelines,
Mm-hmm.
it would seem to me you'd need that outline, that roadmap.
Right. And that's exactly what it is, because when you're starting to try to pull threads from multiple places together at the end, you really have to be able to keep track of where everything's coming from. And then, like, in this next one that I'm working on, I have 3 timelines, which is stupid. Why would I do that to myself? I'm like, why would I? And so I definitely needed an outline for this one, because otherwise it's like, well, how is this one informing this line, and how is this informing this line, and how are they ultimately all going to come together? And so, yeah, the outlining has been a necessary process, but I don't like it.
All right, I should have said this before we even started talking about this book. I'm going to try to avoid any spoilers.
Yes.
So folks, pick it up and read it, and then, if you don't want even the tiniest bit of spoiler, pause the video, go read the book, and then come back and watch us. But I don't even, people have different ideas of what spoilers are, so it's safest to say spoiler warning. I have a sister who thinks mentioning a character's name is a spoiler.
Oh,
which is crazy to me. But she's like, well, now I know there's a character with that name.
Okay.
You spoiled it. This book was not what I expected. I didn't have like real expectations, but from what I read on whichever list it was that I saw it on, and then reading the inside flap, it certainly took me by surprise what the book actually ended up being. And I haven't recorded my review of this yet, but this is something I will be saying in my review. Since I am not a 13-year-old girl, took me a little bit of time to get into it.
Yeah.
But once I was in it, I believe I told you I read this in a day.
Oh wow!
I did not want to put it down. And as I was reading, I generally I'm reading for pleasure. I want to be entertained, so I don't always pick up on underlying themes and different stuff. As I was going through it, and this is where we might be getting a little spoilery, I'm reading along and I'm like, wait, but Caroline is acting just like she said her mother acted.
Right.
And why is she just repeating the same cycle? She should know. She should know better.
Right.
But of course, there's a reason.
Right.
And now I guess underlying theme, would that be the correct term? I didn't get it till basically it was spelled out for me at the end.
Right.
Should I have gotten it earlier?
I don't necessarily think so. I think that it was one of those things where there were some very subtle hand tips. And again, and this is just my perspective of, I say subtle. Other people will be like, this author is browbeating us over the head with, fine. But there were some very subtle hand tips that I think that once you get to that point, you go, oh.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely didn't want to show it all until the very end, which I think maybe irritated some folks. I get it, because it's like, oh, a lot of people thought it was a thriller. And then they get to that end and they're like, this ain't thriller. I'm like, I'm sorry. But yeah, it definitely is one of those moments. There's an aha moment, like almost at the very end.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think relatively early on, I was like, okay, this isn't just a thriller.
Okay, good.
And it could have been. I did wonder for a while why it wasn't like called, is it Joyland? Is that the name of the?
Oh, Jazzland.
Jazzland, yeah.
That was like, a working title for a little bit.
I was like, this could just be called Jazzland. That would fit. But now I understand the title. And there was a point, I don't know if there was any intention of this at all, or if this is just me. There's a point where I'm like, are these werewolves? Is she turning into a werewolf?
There's definitely werewolf vibes. And I don't know if you've ever seen on some of these like cryptid pages, or some of these websites that talk about various cryptids, the dogmen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not quite a werewolf, but it's a man with the face of a dog. And so not quite a full-on werewolf. And I can't remember what website it was, but as I was looking at it, I went, that is so much scarier to me than a werewolf, because there's a familiarity to it, but then there's this viciousness, and it feels more aggressive for some reason. And I couldn't put my finger really on why. But yeah, there's definitely werewolf-y things going on in there.
I was just relatively recently, looking at a thing about cryptids in Ohio, and I'm trying to remember. I feel like dogmen were in Ohio.
Could be.
I'm sure they're all over.
I can't remember where it was, or where they were supposed to be located to, but it was definitely a thing where I went, ooh.
I know we have frogmen.
Yes. Oh, that's a good one.
And of course we have Bessie, the Lake Erie monster.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a list of maybe 10 or 12 that are supposed to be in Ohio. And I know I've read about the dogman. I just can't remember if it was in that list.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah, so I had that vibe for a minute. Is this going to be werewolves? And I liked the back and forth. I didn't put together the significance of the time, the number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a point where, now this is definitely going to be a little spoilery, but there was a point where I was getting closer and closer to the end, like very close to the end. I was like, is there going to be an epilogue that jumps ahead a few years? But it still hadn't told me how the significance of the number of years. Mm-hmm. So I was just thinking, is this going to jump ahead 5 years, 6 years? But of course it was a very specific number of years, which I really enjoyed. The characters, fantastic.
Thank you.
I did Daniel.
Yes. Yeah.
Or, well, yeah, not husband.
Fiance. Yeah.
I did get right from the start that he was never gonna show her statue.
Mm-hmm. What a piece of shit, right?
This guy's a douche. He reminded me. I don't know. Have you read or watched You, the Carolyn Kepner?
Yes.
He reminded me of Beck from the first season.
Yeah.
I never liked that character. She's like
Oh.
my least favorite character in that show. And she just always felt like, I don't know if hipster is the right word, but very wants to be in the scene, wants to be part of this group.
Right. Like very self-aggrandizing, you
Yes.
know, like, yeah.
And I got that feeling from Daniel.
Right.
There are moments when he feels like he's a loving boyfriend, but it almost feels like that's a mask, or he can afford to do that at certain times.
Right. And that was something that I was really, I felt was really important for Daniel is I wanted him to still be human. I didn't want him to be a full-on villain.
Right.
Because I think that that's what's so vicious so frequently in a lot of women's lives is that they are with people. They're not terrible people, but they're not great either.
Right.
And they're doing this damage that they may or may not necessarily realize that they're inflicting, or that they're doing it for selfish purposes because they've never been told no. And so that was really Daniel's character to me. He was like, this is a man who's never been really told no. And he's affable and he's good looking and he's, you know, reasonably talented and he's not used to being threatened. And that he also feels like he can get away with squashing the threat from wherever it comes from. And so I did want him to have these kind of softer moments or these kinder moments of, and I think truly probably he does, and I'm speaking as if he's a real person, but that he does love Caroline in his way,
Right.
as long as she's not a threat.
Mm-hmm.
And that I wanted that duality to be there because as much of an asshole as he ends up being, there's still a part of him where you, at least at the beginning, you kind of like him a little bit.
Yeah.
Seems like a nice guy, you know, and that's the danger of the asshole, right? He could be a good guy. And so that was an important part of Daniel for me. And I know a lot of people got real mad about his quote unquote redemption. Sorry, here comes a spoiler, by the way. Got real mad. Uh-oh, did I lose you? I might have lost him. Maybe I will wait. Uh-oh. I don't know what to do. Hi, everybody. Oh,